on to the Red Planet Live podcast. I am your host, Ashton Zeth, and we are thrilled to be back after a brief hiatus. I am excited to be the new host and a member of the Mars Society crew. We have been diligently working to prepare episodes with stellar guests and provide content that is both educational and intriguing. Today we have a special show planned, and I'm eager to speak with today's guest, Dr. Sarah Milkovich. But before we do that, I want to take just a moment for introductions and a quick announcement. So as I said, my name is Ashton Zeth, and I'm elated to be the new host of Red Planet Live. A little bit about me: my professional background is in tech sales, specifically automation and process management software. I also serve as a Mars Society ambassador. My favorite band is the Goo Goo Dolls, and true crime documentaries is my preferred Netflix genre. As a longtime space enthusiast, I am passionate about STEM education and making humanity an interplanetary species, specifically a presence on Mars. When I met with the Mars Society team about the ambassador role, the opportunity to host Red Planet Live was discussed, and I gladly accepted. So here we are today, and I'm honored to be a part of the podcast, an official member of the space industry. So thank you everybody for joining today and supporting Red Planet Live, supporting the Mars Society. And as you will come familiar, as we do a few more of these episodes, you'll hear me say the best is yet to come. So one quick announcement before we dive in with Dr. Sarah Milkovich. If you follow the Mars Society, you may have heard the recent news. The Mars Society is pleased to announce our partnership with Million on Mars. Million on Mars is a game where you can explore creating and growing your own settlement on Mars. It's set in the 2070s, and the Ad Astra Unlimited Corporation has solved transportation, but now the challenge is on you to settle Mars. Mars on Millions launched over a year ago, has over 10,000 active users, and is a Web3 game where you own your own plots of land on Mars as NFTs on the Solana and Wax blockchains. The seamless transition between NFTs to game objects and back to tradable crypto assets is an amazing aspect of the project because it seems like you could literally make a living just by playing the game. Try out the Million on Mars. We'll share the link here so that you guys can access that. It is free to play for the first 3 days, and then after that, there are 3 different options for paid access. It's really cool to see this partnership come to fruition. Well, with that, now to the important stuff. The real star of our show today is our guest, Dr. Sarah Milkovich. Hi, Sarah. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm thrilled to be speaking with you today. I wanted to introduce you to everybody that's listening today. Dr. Sarah Milkovich is a NASA JPL planetary geologist and system engineer who currently works on the Mars Perseverance rover mission. She specializes in the science operations of robotic spacecraft and has spent over 15 years exploring the solar system with a variety of spacecraft. You have a lengthy resume, and I can't hear all about it.
Well, thank you. Yes, I've been really fortunate to work on a whole host of different missions, also to do some research, mixing science and engineering and working with some really fantastic people. So I'm looking forward to chatting.
Amazing. I can't wait to hear about it. But as I said, when we had a chance to sync, I want to kick off our conversation by starting a reoccurring segment on the RPL podcast called Question of the Day. So for those of you that don't know me, I did this for years previously. Used to do this on social media and when I worked for a different organization. But now feels like the right time to resurrect the QOTD. It's exactly as it sounds. It's a question. They're really basic. The covered topics all across the board. There's really no right answer. It's just meant to be a conversation topic. So, Sarah, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. It's a little controversial. People strongly about this. The question is, pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
Funnily enough, I just had pineapple on pizza last night, so yay, especially with pepperoni.
You nailed my answer there. say also yes. Definitely a yay. The sweet and acidic pineapple pairs really well with the pepperoni. I do love a pineapple and black olive pizza. Shout out to my mom for that combo. Uh, some people feel very strongly that pineapple does not belong on pizza. So I'm glad to hear that I'm not the one. Well, there is a chat too. I'd love to see what people think. Pineapple on pizza, yay or nay? We'll be able to watch the chat here. So you let me know what you think. Let's see. Well, thank you Sarah for participating in our question of the day. I really want to dive headfirst into the fun stuff, and that's learning about you. So, in anticipation for today's show, I have been brainstorming some questions to ask you. From an outsider perspective of NASA and the space industry as a whole, there really is a special allure to working for an organization like NASA because of its obviously incredible historic accomplishments. Plus the monumental work and research that has continued over the last 50 plus years since the moon landing. And I'm hoping today that myself and those listening can learn more about your background, your involvement with the Mars rovers, hopefully get a sneak peek behind the scenes a little bit of life at NASA, and of course, hear your thoughts about exploring the universe and sending human life beyond Earth. Does that sound good?
Sure. I'm not sure where to start in all of that.
It's all over the board. We've got a lot of topics to cover, but that's why we have lots of time for this conversation, and I'm excited. So if you don't mind, let's just jump right in and start. Can you tell me a little bit about your path to becoming a scientist at JPL and the STEM education that you pursued in school?
Absolutely. So working for NASA and working with space exploration was actually a childhood dream of mine. I grew up surrounded by but actually my parents, geology was a hobby for my parents. My great grandfather and my grandfather were iron miners in northern Minnesota, and my grandpa would bring back interesting rocks to my dad, and my dad got into geology as a hobby because of that, and he sort of introduced it to the rest of the family when the rest of us came along. So I grew up always, we'd go for a car drive, and we'd be looking at the road cuts and the rocks. So I grew up in upstate New York, in Ithaca. It's a college town, and so I learned, I kind of absorbed from a young age this idea that there are stories all around us, that the rocks tell the history. Each layer of a rock records the environment under which that rock formed, and then you can also learn about what has happened to that rock since then. But it's like a puzzle in a different language with half of it missing, and so it's the sort of appeal to the challenge of the translation of all of that. And so I grew up knowing that the place that I stood on had one time been a giant ocean. There'd been a shallow sea there, and then much later we had glaciers. We had miles of ice above my head of the house that I grew up in. um, and then going and visiting my grandparents in Minnesota, and I would see entirely different kinds of rocks, and I would and learning the history of that just from all those experiences. It made me really fascinated. I always loved um, learning about the stories behind things, and so that just drew me to science, because science is really trying to figure out the story behind why things are the way they are. um, Excuse me. I also loved stargazing, watching uh, watching meteor showers and things like that. And then I learned that planetary geology is a way to put those two things together. It's the story of the rocks that are out there in outer space. Um,
So is it safe to
and
say you have a favorite rock or a mineral?
I have a soft spot in my heart for hematite, because that's not only what my grandpa and great grandpa were digging up on Earth, but that's also one of the rocks that we got really excited about on Mars because it forms in water. And so it was one of the really slam dunk uh, just pieces of evidence for ancient liquid water on Mars from the Opportunity rover.
I love that connection. Okay. So that led you to pursuing an education, wanting
Yes.
science to understand how things happened, how things are formed.
Yeah, and I also, was a big science fiction fan growing up, but I also watched a lot of science TV shows like Nova and The Day the Universe Changed and things like that. And I was always fascinated by I remember some of the shows like the Nova where it was the Voyager flyby of, I'm not sure which one, if it was I'm dating myself now, which of the outermost gas giants it was, but and then they had like a retrospective of all the other the previous flybys, and I remember just being fascinated by the idea that there were people in a room somewhere, like first the vision, that seeing the teams working together, all these people coming together, and then they're sitting in a room somewhere and they're seeing a picture of a place that's so far away it takes light over an hour to get here from there. They're looking at a place that no human has ever set eyes on, and just the excitement like is palpable. And I was just like, I want to be in that room. Well, how amazing would it be to be in that room with those people?
Mhm.
And so all of those kind of set me on this path. So I ended up, I did a couple high school internships over the summer for the camera team of a spacecraft called Near Earth Asteroid Rendezvous. And they took me to see the launch. And I was in high school. I was thinking about what colleges I wanted to go to, and I got to go see the launch of a spacecraft that I knew a whole bunch of the people who'd been working on. And I think that's like once all those pieces came together, like that was the moment. That was the like, that's
Yeah,
the career.
that
Um,
that trajectory to
yeah.
pursuing career.
So I got my undergraduate degree in planetary science, and then I went to graduate school in planetary geology for my PhD, my master's and PhD. And but all along the way, I knew that really what I was into was less I didn't want to be a professor. I knew I wasn't going to go into teaching. I knew I wanted to work with the spacecraft as much as possible. So I came out to Pasadena started with a postdoc at JPL, which is where you have gotten your PhD, but you still have an advisor. It's kind of a transition role. You're
Mhm.
doing research on your own. It's more self-directed. But then I still felt like, no, I really want to play with robots. And so I switched over into this world of science system engineering, science operations. So it's where we have the engineering teams and the science teams have to come together to operate a spacecraft. And there's a lot of challenges in how they come together. They have different priorities. They kind of speak different languages almost. And in some cases, because we are very international, it's an international field. So in many cases, quite literally, they're speaking different languages. Um, and so I get to be part of the team that brings all these people together to explore the solar system.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm sure a lot of people, myself included, but those that are listening have probably had a similar experience, stargazing and wanting to understand the universe and, how did we get here? And so, yeah, that's really cool that, that's where you started. And I'm sure that a lot of people, have been in the same boat. So, do you have any advice or, perhaps recommendations, for students that are aspiring scientists and engineers?
Well, there's you never know where life is going to take you, right? So it's really hard to say, okay, these are all like, oh, I need to take all these classes. I need to,
Yeah.
yeah, work through this set of experiences. It's a lot more to me, setting yourself up for being able to for like getting opportunities to come your way, and then trusting in yourself to go seize them. Uh, and I know that for myself, there was a lot like it's there's always that little voice, especially when you're facing some giant new challenge, that's like, oh, is this really right for me? Is this going to be too hard?
Yeah.
And I learned early on to just ignore that voice, that
Yep.
it was basically like, if you think something sounds cool, try it. And even if you're like, I don't know how that'll help me on my journey, just if it sounds cool, try it. And because those experiences, they end up adding problem solving tools into your toolbox, and that's really then makes you, it's what you then bring to the table for the next set of challenges. Yeah.
Yeah, that resonates with me. Yeah, putting yourself in the right place at the right time for an opportunity to present itself, and ignoring that voice in the back of your head that says, maybe you're not so qualified for this, or
Right, exactly.
give yourself more time to prepare. Like, sometimes voice it and just sees it. In my role as an ambassador for the Mars Society, my focus is really STEM and getting students interested in pursuing careers in, obviously science, technology, engineering, mathematics. What would you say to those students that are in those really formative years where, I have to say I've got young cousins, and sometimes they tend to be a little bit more, focused on social media than, learning, algebra. So, what would you say to those students to pursue those careers, and really focusing on your education while you're young, setting those foundational, understandings before you can take that next leap? What can I say to
Yeah.
them?
What can you say to them?
Yeah.
Well,
Tell me what to say.
um, let's see. Well, I mean, there's there's creativity is needed in whatever you do. Science, engineering, all of that involves creativity. And I think that a lot of times society kind of puts up this false wall between science, STEM, science, and just the STEM fields, and liberal arts. You need both. You need to build your creativity. You need to communicate. You have to practice all of these things. So, uh, you know, yes, maybe like loving social media. Like, I mean, I think especially during the pandemic, we have all been loving social media a
Guilty.
great
Yep.
deal. But how can what is it teaching you? Are you learning how to communicate with a broad range of audiences from that? Maybe there's a lot of scientists out there and a lot of engineers who use social media, and we're all incredibly enthusiastic about talking about what we do, and you can really engage with a lot of them online.
Absolutely.
So that's very cool. And let's see. But yeah, like they should be able to see how fast things change
Yeah.
on social media, and who's in and who's out. And so think about long term, your education is a better long term gamble than being an influencer.
100%. I completely agree with you there. Yes, one will get you a lot farther, potentially. So, in your current role, obviously you've had extensive education, and it's gotten you to this point where you're a science system engineer at NASA. Can you walk us through what a day looks like for? And I would be curious to know what is the best and, more interestingly, the worst part of working at JPL.
Okay. One of the fun things, one of the things I have always loved about this job is that there is no one standard day, right? Like, uh, there's so many times that I have walked into work or started my work day and been like, okay, here's my list of priorities. Here's the stuff I'm going to do today. And then something will come in and just throw that all off the table, and it's sort of triaging, like, okay, no, actually this is the important thing today, and that has to wait, but I can't let that slip through the cracks, because that might have very bad consequences to a spacecraft. um, so I've been fortunate to work on I've worked on the Mars Phoenix lander. In the I was an instrument I was an instrument sequencing engineer. So it's basically the science team would say, here's the observations we want to take tomorrow on Mars with this particular instrument at this particular time. And my job was to say, okay, here's the set of commands to do that and turn it over to the people who stitch it all together and send it up to the spacecraft. And that experience is that's a very different kind of day than what I later did, like later for Perseverance. I joined Perseverance as part of the science definition team, and so I've been with this rover since I think it's 2013. So I'm 10 years now, and the a lot of that was the engineering team has a question. They're trying to make a decision about something in the design, whether it's flight hardware, it's testing schedules, it's you know, what's the header going to be on all the data packets that come back from the rover. And they came so if they don't know who to go to, they would come to me. I was the lead science system engineer, and at some point then for a while I was also the science operations team chief. I knew who I worked with all of the instrument, the principal investigators for the instruments, the ops leads for the instruments, and my team would facilitate between those two groups and say, okay, you're thinking about, formats of data products. Okay, the right person is this guy. He's the expert on it. He's been thinking about this for as long as Mars rovers have existed. He's putting together a group, and you'll solve that problem over there. Okay, you have a question about how are we going to, how is the command sequencing going to work for this instrument? Okay, these are the people you want to talk to. And then also a lot of my job on Perseverance was to design the process by which the science team comes to decisions about what do we want to do next with the rover. That included rooms. We had to have room for really intense science conversations, and we also had to have very nimble turnaround day to day working with the engineers. How do you do both at the same time? And that was the problem that I was trying to solve. So sometimes it's a lot of just being like, okay, what's the big problem for today? What's the deadlines that are coming up? So what do we have to solve first?
Mm-hmm.
And who are the right people to pull into a room, or a WebEx room is commonly now, so that we can brainstorm and come up with answers. So it's been really fascinating going from being at that, like the day-to-day turnaround of of instrument activities and instrument sequences, to this sort of big thinky, big picture conceptual, like, okay, how do we rise to the challenge of deciding what samples to collect on Mars that could tell us about the history and the potential for ancient life on Mars. And what is the software that we need to support that? And what are the instruments? How do we get, we currently have about 450, no, I think it's more than that now, science team members. Uh, and but a long time ago, it was me and a couple other people. We were running around JPL being like, okay, when the science team shows up, this is what they need. And so yeah, it's been quite a ride, actually.
It sounds like you wear a lot of hats, and it sounds like some days you're just triaging like what is most important, and we'll tackle those things one at a time.
Yeah, very much so. And so sometimes, so I'm going to take a cough drop here. So you asked about the best and the worst. And so the best is when that all comes together and you can feel the just, it's very much like my favorite scene in the movie Apollo 13 is
Yeah.
that scene where they're like, they get these people in a room and they're like, we have to fit the square filter in a round hole, and this is all the things we have.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're just like, okay, sort. I love that. That's my favorite kind of experience. There's also this wonderful feeling when some piece of data comes back. We learn something new that even though I'm not doing the research, but there's something I did something that made sure that happened, that data set could be taken, which is the thing that happened to me. The most memorable for me was on Cassini. Some of the observations of Enceladus, we just really there was things that I did above and beyond the standard practice, and so that's some of the radar data that really helped us figure out that there's an ocean underneath the surface of Enceladus. The worst part is that it really is a series of arguments. You're going through your day and you're having it's basically a series of arguments that gets stressful after a while, especially when it's a series of arguments that you've had before and somebody just wants to have those arguments again because they didn't like the answer the first time, and so they're going to just open it up and relitigate it, and that can get upsetting. And then of course it's always a bad day when we lose a spacecraft. So I've been fortunate that so far, knock on wood, it hasn't happened unexpectedly.
Okay.
It's always been planned.
Okay. All right. Well, I knocked on wood for you, so we're gonna.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I can sympathize with what you're saying about having the same argument over and over again. I think anybody that's ever been in a relationship probably knows how that feels, having the rehashing the same argument over and over again, which can be frustrating. But you always work through it, and it gets better. But you already touched a little bit on some of my next couple of questions, which are specifically around the Mars rovers. I know that currently there's a couple rovers on Mars, including Curiosity and Perseverance, which you're working on. To date, what do you think, from your standpoint, is the most important discovery made by the two rovers on Mars? The two that are still there.
The two that are So Curiosity and Perseverance. So Curiosity really brought a full geochemistry suite to Mars, to answer the question, was Mars ever habitable? And that was, this whole question of was there ever life on Mars is a question that we've been trying to answer since before the space age started.
Right.
And of course, Viking asked that question, the Viking landers, and they brought along experiments, but we didn't know enough about Mars at the time for the experiments to be tuned properly. So we didn't know that there's perchlorate in the dust everywhere on Mars, and that will mess up the kind of experiment that they ran with Viking. So I think it's, for Curiosity, it's really that all the conditions were there to support life billions of years ago on Mars. Is to me, that's such a profound discovery, and it's so foundational for Perseverance to really built off of that.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that actually I think has fascinated me the most of so Perseverance, we've just reached one Mars year on the surface, and we're coming up on our anniversary of landing in February.
Yeah.
And so we spent a good chunk of time exploring the crater floor of Jezero, and we found that the floor of this crater, so underneath the delta and everything, is this giant lava flow that it looks like. So this gets kind of into the geology quite a bit, but it's a cumulate flow. So that means that we had a lava flow that was thick enough that it cooled slowly, and olivine rich crystals sort of came out and grew, and then at the top the melts like it changes the composition of the lava flow as you get the first things drop out, and then the composition changes and you get different minerals up towards the top. And it looks like that's the situation that we have at the floor of Jezero crater, but you have to have a really thick lava flow in order to do that. So there's more to that story that we don't know yet. We have to figure that out, but we were very surprised to discover this olivine cumulate on the floor of the crater.
So since discovering that accumulate, has that been a focus? Hey, we've uncovered this, and now we're going to focus more of our energy, our attention on that.
No, because perseverance is really fundamentally about this search for the evidence of ancient life. And I do want to emphasize it's ancient bacterial life. It's nothing like,
You are
if you
around, not
yeah, it's not ice warriors from Doctor Who or whatever.
yeah.
Um, it's ancient stuff, and so that is not that lava, that cumulate flow, while geologically fascinating, and there's evidence, there's later water interactions with those minerals that could be interesting from a biology perspective, from
Yeah.
a habitability perspective, I should say, not a that's more a fundamental. The real focus is on the delta, and so that's where we drove. So we did this in-depth investigation of the crater floor, and then we drove a great distance to do an in-depth investigation of the bottom of the delta, and
Mm-hmm.
then we're driving up onto the delta soon. And that was actually part of that strategy, is part of what I worked on way before, is this idea that you pick an area that's going to be really rich scientifically, and you investigate it, and then you leave it. And if you decide that it's worth it, you can go back. But we have so much to do with this rover. It's so scientifically ambitious. We have to keep moving. And so we've collected. We have to be very thoughtful about how we collect the data. What kinds of, rather than just saying let's plaster laser zaps and images every single place, it's much more like, okay, what are the questions that we're asking? What is the type of information that we need to answer that question? Let's make sure we get all that in the plan and down on the ground. And then as we drive and we are doing the same for the next spot, we can also be chewing over that data. So that's really how Perseverance works, the operations.
Excellent. No, that's great. It's nice to have a little bit of kind of background understanding of the strategy and kind of the tactic for how you're going to collect that data and then analyze it while continuing the mission. Speaking of Perseverance, I had the opportunity to watch the Perseverance landing live via NASA TV, which was incredible. I can't imagine how everyone within NASA, including yourself, must have felt in that moment. Can you describe that experience for us? What was going through your mind at that point?
Um, well, on the one hand, there was the sort of the jitters and the oh my God, I hope I still have a job in an hour.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
I put so much of my life into this rover. I hope it works. But yeah, there's anxiety, but also just great elation. That,
Yeah.
I mean, it's for me, it was less like the actual moment of landing, but it's more of this ongoing, this thing that I used to be PowerPoint slides, and going all the way back to the science definition team, this thing that were PowerPoint slides and printouts that we taped to the wall in this one conference room at JPL, and we stared at, and we were like, does our logic hold true the whole way? Are there any missing steps in it, trying to explain what we want to do and why we should send this rover to do it? And the fact that that has now turned into hardware on Mars is still mind-boggling to me, honestly. I also remember the moment that they were building the rover over at JPL, and you could go to the clean room and you could see it. And for a long time, it was just like this little box of wires and box of wires. And then they flipped it over, and then it was a big box with wires. And then one day they put the wheels on, and we were like, oh, it's a rover. Okay. So it's just like I don't know. It's hard to wrap your brain around even when you work on these things. But I had a great experience we also so the science team watched the launch and the landing remotely, just like everybody else. We would
Yep.
originally supposed to have gotten together in Florida to watch the launch, but of course, pandemic. So we were all watching it at home online, and it was, I don't remember exactly what time it landed it launched in Pacific on the Pacific time zone. It's all kind of a blur at this point, but I do remember I woke up my son. He was in elementary school at the time, and to come watch the launch. I was like, come watch the launch with me, and he just looks at me and he goes, I didn't sign up for this. and and I was like, too bad. This is
You don't have
you have no choice. You have to come hold mom's hand while she watches this thing she's been working on for so long get strapped on top of an explosion.
need you for moral support because
Mhm.
a lot rides on this, and you want this to be successful too, son.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, I wonder, what is that like? Has he expressed to you kind of his experience in school with having a mom that works for NASA? Like I mentioned before, it has this special allure. Does he understand how cool that is yet, or it's like, oh yeah, my mom works at NASA, like she rovers,
Yeah, I think
something cool.
he I helped give his class a tour of JPL many years back, and I've
Yeah.
gone into the classroom over the years to talk about the rover and Mars. So I think he does enjoy like that kind of reflected glory a little bit, and I
He's cool in
know
class.
that the other like I know other kids are like, ooh, you know, hey, your mom works at NASA, and but I do know the class while I was at my work from home desk watching the landing, he was just on the other side of the wall in his room with his Zoom school class watching the landing as well. So that they all paused. He got them all to pause the class so that they could watch the landing together too. So I think he gets a kick out of it. He he did have there was a summer camp out here that was doing, it was a local museum was doing a kids thing for like 1 week of let's pretend we're building a rover to Mars. And I was like, do you want to take that? And he just kind of looked at me and I was like, or do you get enough of that at home? And he was like, yeah, I get enough of that at home. I was like, oh, fair.
I
Do
could
your
teach.
own thing.
I could run this. This isn't anything I don't already know. He's gonna be teaching everybody else. I can imagine that. Well, speaking of getting the rovers to the surface of Mars, I know that there are tens of thousands of individuals that are involved in the process of building and testing and launching and then managing the rovers once they're on Mars. Can you highlight some of the major challenges of getting a rover to a distant planet like Mars?
Yes. Um, so there's the obvious ones, launching and landing
Right.
safely. There's a lot. I mean, as you said, there's thousands of people who work on these things. That's a lot of moving pieces, um, a lot. No one person has all of the knowledge to build this rover and to get it to Mars. And so you have, I mean, with Perseverance and with Curiosity, we had instrument teams that were, instruments built in other countries that were contributed from other space agencies.
Right.
So we had to know, that that they were going to fit on the rover, that all the pieces were going to fit together, that we were going to be able to just, that a command from the rover computer would make it to the instrument computer kind of thing. We had to, so there's the personality aspect of having such a big team, um, trying to juggle the work culture in and schedule in other countries,
Yeah.
where they have like different holidays. Not only is it a time zone thing and a uh, you know folks in other countries working
Yeah.
with us, they're not necessarily working in their first language.
Right.
Um, but then there's the fact that like a huge portion of Europe goes on vacation for a big chunk of August,
Mm.
and except for Norway, which does it in July. So, like, just some of that kind of juggling.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's some of the major challenges. We have, so the whole sort of field of system engineering helps with some of those challenges. We'd spend at JPL, part of why we've been so successful with planetary spacecraft is that we do spend a lot of time uh, basically sitting and thinking and writing down exactly what we need from the uh, you know whether it's what the hardware is doing, like from the big picture of you know the the project system shall land on Mars. That's one of the things you write down, and then that flows down to the next set. And like, okay, this had like, in order to have that happen, this has to happen with the hardware. This happens to happen with software. This has to happen with the operations team, and it trickles down into the steps that you can actually take. And so we spend a chunk of time working our way through that to improve the chance that when we get to the final stages, stuff actually fits together.
Right.
Which is not to say it works perfectly every time, but
Right. I imagine
uh,
it's a game of telephone.
yes,
So many different people, like you said, across time zones and countries and cultures and languages, to try to get everybody to say, the same thing, that we're going to be able to communicate it to the next person, and we're going to be able to replicate it successfully. I imagine gets very complicated. So there's a lot of those processes in place to make sure
yes.
smoothly.
But it's always difficult when you are doing something that nobody's ever done before. And so
Yeah.
that's another, like, it just budgets becomes a big challenge. And of course, every like that's a complicated can of worms, but it's hard to put a number. Like there's people who have to figure out, how do you put a number on how much it's going to cost to do something that nobody's done before. And that's another challenge, frankly. um, there's other sort of, I'm going to call it more mundane, although it's not mundane at all, issues like the radiation environment of space. We need our computers to withstand just the conditions of space. And so, like, we all now have these, like, our phones and our tablets can do so much, but we've got this, if you think about the conditions of launch, the conditions of landing, the conditions of outer space, all of these things that you have to survive, and there's no opportunity to go in and fix anything once
Hmm.
it's off the earth. Like, you
Right.
can do a software upgrade, but that's it.
Right.
So we use actually very old chips that have been built specifically for outer space, and they're rad hardened. And I remember, because we were trying to do Perseverance as close to build to print as Curiosity, use as much of the engineering designs as possible, and we
Hmm.
hadn't yet gotten even the first kind of approval for building uh, Perseverance. We were still, like, we hadn't even, I think, gone through mission concept review, which is like the very first fundamental basic thing. But the company that had made the chips that Curiosity was built with was not going to make them anymore. So we were like, we better go buy a whole bunch just so that we have them,
Hmm.
because we hope that we will be a real mission. So just some of these logistics get amazing.
A lot of layers of complication there, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really insightful. I know we've got roughly 15 more minutes scheduled, so I've got two more questions for you, and then I encourage anybody that's listening that has a question that you want to ask Dr. Sarah Milkovich, feel free to put that in the chat, and we'll try to get those answered. But the two questions that I have for you, the Mars Society and myself believe that Mars is the appropriate next planetary body to send humans, where we will eventually establish a settlement, becoming interplanetary species. In your opinion, do you believe that Mars is the next giant leap for mankind? Why? Or
It's, there's the part of me that loves science fiction and the part of me that loves, you know, like the Apollo and now Artemis,
Mhm.
um, that is wistfully wishing it to happen. On a more practical side, I
Sure.
know too many ways that Mars can kill you, and I know like there's a lot of technical challenges. There's a huge number of technical challenges, and I'm sure that we could sit and we could run through all of them, and probably the chat would like work on trying to nitpick ways around reality in certain ways. But like there's also the fundamental psychological aspect, which is like you look at how hard it's been for people to wear masks and stay indoors in this pandemic, and then you think about living somewhere where you will never feel the breeze on your face. You will never be able to go outside without being entirely enclosed in, pretty heavy duty spacesuit because of the radiation. You can't bring your spacesuit inside to your house either because of the dust situation on Mars.
Mhm.
And if you try and seal up a lava tube or something and pump it full of air, then you're never going to see the sun either. So I think I I know so much about just the challenges of operating a robot at Mars, and I've seen how we've behaved for a while. So I'm feeling pessimistic, let's say. And I need to emphasize that that's me personally. That is not an official NASA statement or anything like that. I also, for me, the excitement is really more about the science.
Mhm.
And robots are always going to be able to go where people can't. And so that's why I like working with the robots.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. Yes, and in every situation, you got to have the person that's playing devil's advocate. It sounds really it's exciting, but we have to look at what those harsh realities are. And yes, the psychological challenge, it may be just as difficult, or maybe more than the physical. Like you said, if you're trapped there by yourself, never feeling wind or sun, that could do a lot to somebody mentally. So that's always a risk when you potentially send humans off of Earth. Yeah, that's a good one. One question that I had for you, it's a little tidbit about kind of myself, but also I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. My friends and coworkers, some of who are listening right now, hi guys, all know me as the space nerd, and they come to me with questions about NASA missions, Mars conspiracy theories. I get often, and sometimes they want me to fact check articles that they see online, and they're like, "Is this true?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'm not the expert there." But one question that I receive all the time is about the funding of these programs. Is it worth the money to send rovers, astronauts to space and Mars? So, Sarah, my question to you is, what do you say to those people who think that funding space programs is not a good use of tax dollars, and that money should be used and spent here on Earth?
Well, first of all of the money is spent here on Earth. We're not, launching ATMs into space. So we actually do a great deal with the money we get, and we get a very small, tiny fraction of the taxpayer money. It mostly goes to other parts of the federal government. The other thing is that, you know, there's a ton of things that NASA ends up inventing or optimizing, like on the way to building these these things that there's a ton of spin-off technology that comes back to Earth. The thermal blankets for spacecraft, those that turned into the emergency blankets, the shock blankets that folks get. There's I think quite famously now, the CCD cameras, the little tiny cameras in your phones,
Yeah.
are
Yep.
from NASA. That's from NASA.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, on a sort of more personal note for me, like there's some of the techniques used for analyzing data. Um, there's some techniques that were used for looking at. I'm not sure exactly what kind of data originally, but uh, it pulls out a lot more information through this sort of algorithm and analysis, uh, and it is now adapted and used to assess mammograms and is helping catch breast cancer earlier and earlier. And my mom is a breast cancer survivor, and so for me, that's a very personal, yes, that was a good thing. So there's just so many ways, and then we've also learned wherever we go, we learn about. When we learn about these other planets, we're learning about our own as well. The first concept of the greenhouse effect and this idea that changing the atmosphere, excuse me, can actually raise the temperature of your planet, uh, came from studying Venus and trying to understand why Venus is the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so there's all sorts of things. We have to build materials that stand up well in very cold temperatures. Uh, you know, we have to build materials that stand up really well in really high temperatures. All of that is applicable in one way or another.
Yeah.
And then there's also just that like inspirational thing. There's so many people who like just being able to step outside of yourself for a while and kind of think about the bigger picture. Think about the fact that we are on this. The more we look out in the rest of the world, the universe, the more we realize how special this planet really is. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed a lot of the points that I was hoping for in my presentations that I've been delivering as a Mars Society ambassador to students.
Excellent.
Talking about why it's important, and I think I've got 6 reasons on there. And one is that the technological developments that come from the space industry. So of course, they're middle school students, and so I tell them like, hey, that camera in
Hmm.
your phone comes from the space industry, and you know. Water filtration systems, firefighter equipment, workout equipment comes from the space industry, and creating those tools and that equipment so that astronauts could survive in space. And those things have since trickled down, and you use those in your everyday life, and you may not even realize it. And then obviously, there's the inspiration aspect, encouraging and inspiring that the next generation to push the boundary of what we are capable of, and learning about ourselves and the universe. And so, yeah, thank you for highlighting those. I know that I'm on the right track when I say those.
Excellent.
I'm not just making that stuff up anymore. So thank you for confirming that. I know we have a couple questions from our listeners, so we're going to try to highlight some of those. The first question that I see is from Graham. The question is, some people, like Steve Benner, have argued that we need to get better life detection experiments to Mars before humans can get there, and the clock is ticking. What do you think?
From a astrobiology perspective, if you ever want to know, did Mars ever host life, or is there current life deep underground? You got to do that before humans. Like, humans are ugly bags of mostly water, as Star Trek puts it. But we're sort of a walking pig pen of contamination, and sending humans to Mars is going to have an impact on the system. So it's all a matter of priority. It's a matter of funding. I don't have a better answer than that.
All right, I like it. Let's see. Another question. This is from Robert. When will we see Perseverance-sized helicopter rovers on Mars, Venus, or Titan?
Ooh, how much money do you have? That's hugely that's a giant expensive thing. I mean, and so like a lot of times when we have a really complicated engineering problem, you can solve it with enough money and time, and you don't always have enough money and time to solve all of the problems that you end up having. The Ingenuity, the helicopter that's
Yeah.
traveling with Perseverance, is really tiny because the Mars atmosphere is so thin. It has these huge blades and really tiny, very lightweight body. They're looking into having bigger but not rover-sized helicopters to help with the sample return aspect as the follow-on mission to Perseverance, and uh, then there is also the Dragonfly mission to Titan, which is like a quadcopter kind of thing that is you know being put together, and it's very cool. It's going to fly around and land and on Titan, Saturn's moon, and have a little drill to drill into the surface, have some chemistry instruments to analyze the material, to look at what is the surface of Titan's a really fascinating place. And you know you can have a whole nother one of these conversations just about Titan. So that one's coming. And then beyond that, who knows? We now have proved the concept of a helicopter on other planets. We'll see what happens.
See if we can do that. Okay, well, I know we're coming up on time. I got one more question before we close it out, and this is from Roger, who is a fellow ambassador. His question is: Last September, a video from the Mars helicopter showed a piece of debris hanging from one of its legs, a membrane-like streamer that fell away during flight. Any update on that?
Yeah, we had the FOD. We call that foreign object debris. Is what we call it when you see something in the pictures that you're like, that's not supposed to be there. That's human made. We think that it's probably little bits of. I think the last time I heard the best guess right now is that it's little bits of the entry, descent, and landing system. The parachute, the all the cords, all of that is still. It crash landed on Mars. It's blowing around. I mean, the breeze is not like a strong breeze, but there is a breeze, and so we think that the helicopter picked up a little bit of that at some point during its travels. We've seen other FOD on the rover itself, or on the ground, and so some of that is stuff coming off of the rover, and some of that is little bits from the entry, descent, and landing system on the ground.
There we go. All right, Roger. There you go. That's what it is. Well, there we go. I think we'll leave it at that. I know there were some other questions, so thank you everybody for submitting those. I wish we had more time to read every question, but I did get an update. We had 2-1 pineapple on pizza voted yes. So
Excellent.
people were all in the same boat. So thank you for voting, guys. I appreciate that. Yeah, this has been great. Dr. Sarah Milkovich, thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. You've really shared a lot of great information, and I know that myself and the rest of us, we've all learned something today. So thank you so much for your time and helping me kick off my first episode.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been fun to chat, and hope to come back someday and we can chat some more.
I think we can make that happen. Well, I would love to have you on and continue the conversation. I've got other questions that I didn't get to, so we'll leave that for version 2 when we pick those up. But wanted to say a huge thank you to our executive director, James Burke, our PR director, Michael Stoltz, James Melton. Thank you so much for recommending this. Our friends at Liftport, Michael and Leah, thank you so much for your help. And a major thank you to everybody who's joined in and listening. I'm so appreciative of you guys for joining today's podcast and submitting your questions and engaging. You make my job a little bit easier when we've got those members that are listening. So thank you again. I appreciate everybody. we'll wrap it up here. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next month. Bye, everybody.